Welcome to It's Called Football, a new channel, your source for all things related to the best sport in the world. There's lots of different aspects of the game that we are going to be covering, but our first focus right now is England, as the football season is set to kick off this weekend for the majority of teams in English football. So let's get right into it.
So, if you're new to the game, you might have heard of the Premier League before, but that's kind of where your understanding of English football stops. What some of you might know, some of you might not know, is that below the Premier League there are a bunch more divisions extending all the way down to the amateur level of English football. So, directly below the Premier League, we have the EFL, or English Football League, which itself is composed of three divisions. The first one being the Championship, the second one being League One, and the third one being League Two.
Why is the Championship not the name for the top division in English football? We don't know. Don't ask us. That's something that's actually beyond our knowledge.
Yeah, one thing that a lot of new fans comment about very early on is the strange naming of the leagues. Championship doesn't make sense. League One and League Two also don't make sense, being divisions 3 and 4 of English football. But that's not where it stops. Below League Two, we also have the National League, which again sounds like the name that you should have for the top flight, but in the case of England, it's the fifth division. And you can see in their logo, they've got a thumbs up. You might think that if you're a National League team, the only way is up. So without further ado, let's jump into what the National League looks like. We're going to start here and work our way up the pyramid. I did lie a little bit on the previous slide. The National League is not the lowest level in English football, but it is the lowest level that spans the entire country. Below that, you get into regional divisions and semi-professional and amateur teams. So we're going to cut it off here unless you guys want to learn more about the lower leagues, in which case we can absolutely start covering that as well. But we'll start here. This is the National League table as we enter the new season. Normally, if you were to Google what the division looks like before any teams have played any games, the names are listed alphabetically, but we've decided to write them out according to where the teams finished in the league table last season. So we see at the top of the league we've got Hartlepool United and Rochdale. Those are two teams that performed so poorly in League Two last season that they've actually been demoted. They've been relegated down to the National League, so they're going to be playing a division lower than they were last year. Then teams ranked from 3rd to 20th. They were in the National League last year. They did well enough to stay in the league, but they didn't do so well that they moved up, or so poorly that they dropped down. And then the teams from 21st to 24th are teams that were in a division even lower than the National League, and they have been promoted. So they're playing at a higher level. Some of them are returning after just a couple of years outside the National League. But in the case of Oxford City down in 23rd, this is the highest division they've ever been in. So even though this is Division 5 of English football, this season is sort of a crowning achievement for Oxford City because they've never been at this level. Also, you'll see that the team in 10th, Dagenham and Red, that's my favorite team. Dagenham and Redbridge is their full name. They're red and blue because, my team, our channel, we get to make the rules. So, yeah, this is the setup of the league going into the new season. We'll talk a little bit about the league just looking at this table, and then we'll dive into where the teams start in the coming season. So, there's two of us here. One of us is a specialist in the upper echelons of football in England and across Europe. The other one, that would be me, is more well-versed in the lower levels. So I'll talk mostly about the National League. Hopefully we'll both learn something as we go through the leagues, and hopefully we'll inform you along the way. So if you're new to the game or new to this level of the game, most of these names won't mean very much to you. So I'll just talk a little bit about sort of my expectations for the season, looking at this roster of teams, teams I'd like to face, wouldn't like to face, favorites for winning the league, and favorites for getting relegated at the end of the season. So for me, a team that's often caused me and my team, Dagenham, problems over the past several years is Chesterfield. They used to be in League Two a few years back. They got relegated a few years ago, and they've been causing problems for National League teams ever since. I think they're a team that's strong enough that they don't really deserve to be playing in Division 5. They should be somewhere higher up the football pyramid, and as a result, they are definitely an opponent I fear, especially traveling away to Chesterfield to play. Our away fixture there is a lot harder than most games in the league. There are a few other names that have caused problems for me and my team and for many teams in the league over recent years. One of them is Barnet. In the past couple of seasons, they've been very good and, winning games that they shouldn't have been winning. And last season, that culminated in them finishing 5th in the National League, which was a lot better than I'd expected at the start of the season. My team's local rivals, Southend United, they started last season fairly poorly, ended up on a great run of form, finished 8th, but they've been having off the field problems, administrative issues and finance issues in recent months. So they were in danger of basically being liquidated if they didn't sort their finances out. Fortunately for them, they do seem to have done that, so they will be playing in the National League this season. I just wonder how much the chaos off the field in the summer months will affect the players and the staff as they enter the new season, because I don't think they've been able to prepare as much as everybody else.
Just one thing for any of you out there that are reading all these names, don't worry if you don't know how to pronounce all of them just yet. Don't worry, it's not necessarily intuitive in every single situation, but we will pronounce all of them and explain them as we go over the coming days and weeks. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, a great example of that is the first name listed in the league. To me, it looks like it should be Hartlepool United, but the Britishers, they all say Hartlepool, so that's what we've learned to call them. But yeah, the names, some of them are a little bit weird, some of them are similar and easy to get confused, like the teams in 17th and 18th, Altrincham and Aldershot. I've heard enough people confuse the two, even fans in England that'll accidentally say one when they meant to talk about the other. But yeah, getting back to the league itself, there are a couple of names that I'm pleased to see in the National League this season. Kidderminster, the team in 24th in this table, they were participating in a lower division last season. They've come up. I'm glad to see them up. They used to be in the National League a few years ago. Seemed like a solid fan base, and I was very unhappy to see them drop. So it's good to have them back in this division. AFC Fylde are a team that I never expected to see get relegated from the National League a couple of seasons ago, but they have managed to find their way back into it. So it's good to have them here as well. A couple of teams that I think will be looking over their shoulders the entire season as they try to avoid relegation. Again, I haven't been following the teams particularly closely over the summer months, so I'm not entirely sure what changes have been made, but teams that I would expect to struggle this campaign are Oxford City, because they're new to this level, Maidenhead United, and Dorking Wanderers. Dorking Wanderers, that's a team that I think overperformed last season, but they strike me as a team that won't feel too comfortable in the National League. I could be wrong about that, and I'd be happy to be proved wrong by some of these teams. But at the end of the season, 4 teams do have to go down, and I do think Maidenhead, Oxford City, and Dorking Wanderers are a good shout to be 3 of those 4. For the 4th team, it's anybody's call. It could be one of the teams that's just come up. It could be Altrincham, Aldershot. It could be somebody else entirely. There are a lot of teams in the National League that you'll see struggling to stay in the division. They're at the lower end one season, and then they're trying to win the league the next, and vice versa. So we could see a team like Chesterfield or Woking finish farther down the table, or a team like York City finish, way higher. So lots of interesting stuff. Let's dive into the first matches that we're going to see in the National League. So these are 6 out of the 12 games you can see on the screen now. For match day 1, there's my team, Dagenham and Redbridge. They're traveling away to Altrincham, so I'm hoping for a win there, just because that's a team that I do think a team of Dagenham's quality should be able to beat. Aldershot versus Oxford City is an interesting match. I'm not sure who I'd expect to see win that one, but given that Aldershot didn't exactly have a great season last year, I think they'll be eager to start with a win against a team like Oxford City. If they lose that, I think their fans will start to really be stressed about the season ahead, because this is not a game you should be losing this early. A few other interesting games. Barnet, who performed really well in the National League in the last couple of seasons, facing Hartlepool United. That's definitely one that I would keep my eye on this first match week. Chesterfield, always a strong team. If I were Dorking, I would not expect too much out of this first match, but obviously, you have to play the game to get the result, and there's every chance that Dorking Wanderers snatch a draw or even a win against Chesterfield on this first match day. And here are the rest of the games on match day 1. Not too much really that's jumping out at me here. It'll be interesting to see, again, Maidenhead versus AFC Fylde. That's two teams that could find themselves at the wrong end of the table later on in the season, so it'll be good if either of them can pick up some points early on. Also, Wealdstone versus York City. York is a team that I didn't expect to see get relegated when they did. Wealdstone is a team that I didn't expect to perform particularly well last season. They were my relegation favourites last season, and then they absolutely proved me wrong. So I'll be interested to see how they do as well. And of course, Southend United, after all the trouble and chaos that they've suffered this summer, I'm interested to see if they'll be able to start the season off on the right foot. So that's it for the National League. Let's go up a division to EFL League 2. So here again, you can see we've got 24 teams. All the divisions we're covering today do have 24 teams in them, but you can see that the red and green teams are different. They've got different numbers of teams going up and down from each division, which can get a little bit confusing. So here, we've got 4 teams that have been relegated from League 1, which is the 3rd division of English football. Those teams are MK Dons, Morecambe, Accrington Stanley, and Forest Green Rovers. It's an interesting list of teams that have come down. Accrington and Forest Green are 2 teams that if you asked me 10 years ago, would either of them be playing anywhere above League 2, I would have laughed in your face. And I think a lot of English fans would have laughed in your face as well. There was a commercial a few decades ago, in England where basically Accrington were the butt of the joke, being known across the country to be a weak football team, and they ended up playing in the 3rd division last season, and they'd been in League 1 for a few years. So it's unfortunate to see them come down, but I do expect them to fight in the top few spots for League 2 this season. Other noteworthy names in this division are Stockport County and Salford City, both of which have enjoyed a good deal of success in League 2. They both finished near the top last season. A couple of others that jump out at me. One is AFC Wimbledon. They, a couple of years ago, were playing in League 1, and then they got relegated to League 2, and last season finished just a couple of spots from relegation in League 2. So concerning for AFC Wimbledon to have been playing in the 3rd division and then fight and struggle to stay up in the 4th division. And the most famous name in lower league English football, Wrexham, they won the National League last season, so they got promoted, and now they'll be playing in League 2. And one thing that I don't think a lot of supporters know, certainly not fans of football that don't follow the lower leagues, I think they tend to miss the fact that the level of quality between League 2 and the National League is very similar. So generally you'll see across football, across other leagues and in other countries, you'll usually see that a team that's just been promoted to a given division will usually struggle to stay in that league because the quality is at a much higher level. That doesn't really seem to be the case in League Two. Teams that come up from the National League have performed very well in a division of very similar quality. So you might actually see plenty of predictions from fans going into the new season that Wrexham or Notts County will go up another division because League Two and the National League have such similar levels of quality that if you've got a team that's just been promoted from the National League, it's a good sign that they'll be fighting to win League Two as well. In another video, we will explain how promotion and relegation work. It can be a little bit complicated the first time you get acquainted with it, but we'll explain all of that for you. Notts County are also a very strong team. They also got promoted just behind Wrexham from the National League last season. I would expect both of those teams to be in the mix fighting for the League Two title at the end of this season. Forest Green Rovers, jumping to the team in fourth, I never expected to see them in League One, and I have a feeling like they'll struggle in League Two just because they didn't really put up nearly as much of a fight as the rest of the League One teams that ended up getting relegated last season. So I do expect them to finish kind of in the mid to lower half of the table. As for the rest of the teams, my team's not in this division, so I have followed them to an extent, but not nearly as much as the teams in the National League. So nobody else is really jumping out at me, but we can take a look at the first fixtures in this division. So match day 1 in League 2 this weekend, we'll see Accrington Stanley take on Newport County, Colchester United versus Swindon, Crawley Town versus Bradford City, Crewe Alexandra versus Mansfield Town, Doncaster Rovers versus Harrogate, and FGR versus Salford City. So I do think Forest Green playing Salford will be an interesting match. Salford City are a team that have had a good deal of support pumped into them from their owners, and they have climbed the divisions in recent years. Forest Green are also a team that climbed the divisions, but I don't think they had nearly the same kind of financial backing. So I think Salford have the edge there, and they'll be one of the teams that's keen to really fight for promotion this season. I think they've been unfortunate not to finish higher up the table in recent seasons, but maybe this is their year. And the last 6 games in League 2 for this opening weekend. The big one for me is Wrexham versus MK Dons. MK Dons is definitely a team that for most of the time that I've been following them, they've been sort of bouncing between League 1 and League 2. So they're never, or at least it's very rare to see them struggle in League 2. Usually you'll see them giving teams a good fight, and Wrexham might be the ultimate test. We don't know yet, of course, whether Wrexham will coast to another title this season or if they'll struggle more than they expected, but that'll definitely be an interesting game. As will Sutton United versus Notts County. Those are both teams that just a few years ago were both in the National League, and now they've both made that step up, obviously in different seasons. But that'll be really interesting to keep an eye on as well. So with that, we jump into League One, and now our Premier League specialist will start to recognize more and more names here. Are there a few that jump out at you here?
Yeah, there's definitely a few here that I remember seeing back in the Premier League, the top division, about a decade or so ago, or within the last 10 years. Long-standing Premier League fans, you should hopefully recognize names like Portsmouth, Derby County, Bolton Wanderers, and Wigan Athletic is probably the most recent name to jump out at you. They were in the Premier League about a decade ago and even recent FA Cup winners. So it's a little sad, obviously, and surprising to see the fall from grace, but this is roughly the level that most of those teams have been at, barring the ones that have only just come down.
Yeah, so that's one thing about English football is because every division is connected to every other division through promotion and relegation, you will see teams from down in the depths of the amateur or semi-professional game rise up the ranks in just a few years and enjoy success at the maybe not at the highest level, but in and around League One, which is the third division. And then conversely, you'll see teams that really, like you said, fall from grace. They're in the Premier League, they enjoy their time in the Premier League, and then they get relegated twice, thrice in a row, and they just they fall into footballing oblivion as a team that's just sitting in the middle of League Two. Nobody remembers their name. It does happen, and there are teams here, teams like Portsmouth, that when we got into the game, Portsmouth were Premier League regulars, and then they got relegated and kept falling down the football pyramid. Portsmouth and Bolton and Blackpool, I think, have all been in League Two since we saw them in the Premier League. So they've suffered 3 successive relegations. Now, of course, they're back up to League One, but there's still a long way to go for those teams if they've got aspirations of getting back up to the Premier League. One thing that might confuse some of you as you are bombarded with all these team names is some of them that look not just similar but almost identical, like Oxford United in 19th place here. Very easy to confuse that with Oxford City in the National League, which is 2 divisions down. And then you'll see a similar case coming up with, we've got Bristol Rovers sitting in 17th in League One, not to be confused with Bristol City, who are in the next division that we're going to talk about, the Championship. But yeah, lots of big names in this league. Any promotion favorites?
I think Wigan are going to struggle a little bit simply because of the recent points deduction that they've been hit with. Again, we'll go into detail about that in a separate video in the future. I wouldn't be surprised to see Reading try to make a shout and go straight back up to the Championship, and obviously the teams that are sitting up, roughly up to about 7th or 8th were all in the running until quite late into the season, so any of them have a good shout for being in the promotion spots. In terms of winning the league, I think Reading is probably the favourite at the moment.
Yeah, Reading's always a good shout. For most of the time that we've been following football, Reading have been a Championship team. We've seen them in and out of the Premier League once or twice, but it feels like League One is a step too low for them. They should be definitely in the fight to go back up this season. A few other notable names for me. Barnsley are a team that I definitely think could be in the Championship. They were a couple of seasons ago, and as you can see, they finished 4th in League One last season. So, actually, it might not have even been 4th. I don't remember which. So, the way promotion works in League One, you've got 2 teams that go straight up. The teams that finish 1st and 2nd, they'll get promoted. And then the 4 teams that finish right below that, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, they battle it out in a playoff system, and one of them goes up. So we've listed Barnsley as 4th, but I don't remember if they actually finished 4th or in a slightly different position. But either way, they were in the mix. They were at the top end of League One last season. Peterborough United, also a team that always seem to be near the top of League One and can never figure out how to actually get promoted. So I expect them to be in that fight again. Other names that we have seen higher up in recent years, just looking at this list, Charlton Athletic, that's one that I would expect to see fight a little bit harder than they seem to have last season. Finishing 10th is a bit low for Charlton. I would have expected better out of them. On the other end, Cambridge United did seem to struggle in League One. They just escaped relegation by 1 spot. And I do think that there's quite a bit of quality coming up from League Two in those bottom 4 teams there: Leyton Orient, Stevenage, Northampton, and Carlisle United. I do expect definitely at least Leyton Orient to hang on to a spot in League One this season. They seem to have a very easy time in League Two last year. And I again, just like between the National League and League Two, there is an overlap in quality between League Two and League One. So I'm not sure I would say I expect Leyton Orient to be near the top, but I do expect them to be sitting comfortably in the middle and not in a battle to avoid relegation at the end of the season. Stevenage, Northampton Town, and Carlisle, those are teams that I have seen uh, bouncing around League One and League Two. Sometimes you'll see them in League One and struggling to survive. Sometimes you'll see them in League Two, either struggling to survive or in the fight to get promoted once again. So I don't expect them to have as comfortable a season as Leyton Orient, but I do expect that not all three of them will go straight back down. So for teams like Cambridge United, Oxford United, Port Vale, Bristol Rovers, Cheltenham, and Burton Albion, those are all teams that have been in League Two relatively recently. Even Exeter, Fleetwood, Shrewsbury, Lincoln, these are all teams that have been in League Two not that long ago. So any of them could find themselves in a relegation battle. So looking at the opening fixtures in League One, we've got a whole bunch to keep an eye on. For me, the standout fixture from these six is Charlton Athletic versus Leyton Orient. I think that'll be a closer game than perhaps it looks on paper, given that Leyton Orient just got promoted from a lower division. Lincoln City are also an interesting team. They have risen through the ranks in recent years, and Bolton Wanderers have fallen from grace from the Premier League. So the fact that they're meeting in match day one of the League One season, I do think it'll be interesting to see if either of those teams can start the season with a win, or if they'll share the spoils on this first day. And in the last six fixtures, Reading versus Peterborough jumps out at me. Two teams that could be in the fight for promotion. And we've also got Northampton versus Stevenage, which I believe are two teams that just got promoted from League Two. So it feels like a League Two match. It's being played in League One. It could end up being a game that decides who stays up and who goes down towards the end of the season. Is there anything that's jumping out at you here?
Derby versus Wigan is another big one to kick off already. Wigan having just dropped down, Derby having finished reasonably high up in the league last season. It's important, I think, for both of them to get off to a winning start if they have any hopes of getting ahead of the race for promotion as early as possible. And the same applies to the fixture you just mentioned between Northampton and Stevenage. I think, again, in a race to avoid the drop, it's really, really crucial for both those sides to try and get off to a winning start building momentum that might be able to carry them through the season and make sure they're safe early.
And with that, we're entering the EFL Championship, the second division in English football, just below the Premier League. This is where my area of specialty kind of stops, because there are plenty of names here that are big enough to get enough attention from fans of the Premier League. So if you want, you can start on this one, and then I can jump in later.
Yeah, so there's a lot of names here in this division that, again, longer standing Premier League fans will recognize the majority of these names, even if you've only been following over the last year or 2 years or even 6 months. There are names that might jump out at you. The most notable, obviously, are the sides that were relegated from the Premier League last season: Leicester, Leeds, and Southampton. All of them have been in the Premier League for at least a few years. Leicester, obviously, are famous for being winners of the Premier League 7 seasons ago and now find themselves the division below. So it's, again, another example of how quickly English football can change if you are not keeping with the pace. Other names that stand out, obviously, are Middlesbrough, who have been regular in the Premier League for a while. Coventry, who made a strong push last season to go up, but ultimately fell just short at the playoff stage. Sunderland as well, who were running close last time. And then you've got teams like Blackburn, former winners of the Premier League. You've got teams like West Brom, Huddersfield, Watford, Swansea, Stoke. All of these sides were regulars in the Premier League for a while, for quite a long time, and now find themselves a little bit in limbo in the second division. So there's a lot of teams in this division that could be making the push to go back up, including the newly relegated sides. But I think you're more the expert now on the promoted sides. What chances do they have? What are they looking at for the season?
Yeah, so looking at the promoted teams, Ipswich Town is one that I always it's a name I always expect to see in the championship, so I don't expect them to struggle. Sheffield Wednesday have had problems in the past. I used to consider them a championship team, but they don't exactly look out of place when they're in League One. So it's good to see them back here, obviously, but I'm not sure they'll be as comfortable as Ipswich. Plymouth Argyle are a team that I did not expect to see at this level. At the time that my team, Dagenham and Redbridge, were playing in League Two, Plymouth were basically always there as well, and I kind of expected them to stay there or at most stay in League One. But the fact that they got promoted, and you know they had a really good season last year. They've they've walked into the EFL Championship this season. Um, I don't think they're going to struggle nearly as much as Sheffield Wednesday, but I do expect them to have a bit of a tough time. This is where the gap in quality does start to show between teams in the Championship and teams in League One. You've got teams here that have just been relegated from the Premier League. They've got tons of money from sponsors and match day revenue and things like that. They've got great facilities from playing in the top flight and from earning all that money, playing at the highest levels of football, going up against teams that, third division or fourth division, even just a few seasons ago. The difference in quality between just the off the pitch stuff, the facilities and the coaching staff and all of that, it can make a big difference for teams, depending on whether you've just come down from the Premiership or if you've just come up from League One. Some other names for me as well, noteworthy names to keep an eye on this season would include teams like Sunderland. They're a team that used to be Premier League regulars, got relegated a few seasons ago, even had a documentary made about them following their relegation as they tried to go straight back up. It seemed like it would make for really good TV. And then they got relegated again out of the Championship and down to League One. Since then, they've obviously bounced back. They've come into the Championship and they were in the fight for promotion last season, losing out at the playoff stage. But yeah, lots of big names here at the top and plenty of names at the bottom that you could envision struggling. For me, Rotherham United are a team that generally have struggled while they've been in the Championship. They're another name that used to be regulars in League Two when we started following football, which was about 15 years ago. Yeah, so I definitely see teams here that look like they'll have a very easy time in the Championship. Leicester being one of them, former Premier League winners and not even that long ago. Leeds and Southampton, I wouldn't expect to struggle that much. I'm not sure if I expect Southampton to go straight back up. Leeds, maybe. I'm not sure because the thing is, when you get relegated from the Premier League, you tend to lose a lot of players that would like to keep playing at the highest level. You lose a lot of things when you get relegated from the Premier League. So I do expect some sort of struggle for Leeds and Southampton. I do feel like Leicester could go straight back up. As for who could join them, it's possible that Middlesbrough and Coventry will at least be in the race for that. Sunderland, I would love to see Sunderland back up in the Premier League. After they got relegated, I watched the documentary that was made about them. They've sort of become my de facto championship team to support. But yeah, I just hope it's an interesting fight for the title because I find it gets rather dull if you've just got one or two teams that are running away with it. So hopefully we have a really interesting season. Any closing thoughts about the championship?
Yeah, I think Leicester, I agree with you that out of the three relegated sides, they have the strongest chance of getting back up to the Premier League. I do think they're going to struggle a little bit more than you think. They've lost some key players this summer already in the transfer window, and to my knowledge, they haven't quite replaced that quality yet with enough players or the same caliber of players. So it's going to be fun to see how they fare. I do still think I would expect them to go up, but I'm not sure I would expect them to win the championship. Leeds, I think, are actually going to struggle more than Southampton are, for reasons that we'll talk about in a little more detail in the coming days and weeks. But aside from that, I think you've pretty much covered the basics on the championship now.
Great, then let's talk about the fixtures. One thing you should note, so most weekends, most of the games will begin on Saturday afternoon local time, so in England around 3 p.m. For us, if you're on the east coast of Canada or the US, then it's more like 10 a.m. Give or take an hour on either side. But we do have in the championship, probably for broadcasting reasons, we've got the first game of the season is kicking off Friday instead of Saturday, so that's Sheffield Wednesday versus Southampton. So if you're interested in following the lower levels of English football, you can start that as early as Friday instead of waiting for the weekend itself. Uh, Other games here, anything that's jumping out at you in these six?
Middlesbrough versus Millwall is standing out. Both of them finished, I think, in the top 8 spots of the league last season. Could be very, very important for Middlesbrough to get off to a strong start if they're pushing for another promotion campaign, and especially a successful one. Stoke versus Rotherham is another one that, although it's not necessarily a fixture related to the top end, Stoke have been sort of bouncing around in the middle of the table fairly regularly over the last couple of seasons since they've gone down from the Premier League. Rotherham is a good opponent for Stoke if they want to try and push for maybe an outside chance at the promotion spots, but at the very least, Stoke should be aiming for a win there at home to try and get a strong start already to the new campaign.
And these are the remaining six fixtures in this first collection of matches for the championship. As you can see, three of them will be on Saturday. That's those first three: Swansea versus Birmingham, Watford versus QPR, and Blackburn versus West Brom. And then we've got three games that will be played on Sunday. So a full weekend of football, one game on Friday, a bunch on Saturday, and then a few on Sunday. For me, the big game of the weekend is Leicester versus Coventry. Leicester obviously just relegated from the Premier League. Coventry made it to the absolute final hurdle before falling short in the race for promotion last season. They lost to Luton Town, who you'll hear more about next week. They were one game away and maybe just a couple of mistakes away from getting into the Premier League. So definitely a team that you could argue is borderline Premier League quality against another team that definitely has been Premier League quality in recent years. But both are teams that I would expect to see fight for the league title this season. That's definitely the big one for me.
Yeah, I think with a focus there to Leicester and Coventry, that is probably the biggest fixture in the championship this weekend. So for any of you that are able to watch it on Sunday, I would definitely check that one out. Leicester, like I said, newly relegated from the Premier League, and they finished in the first of the three relegation spots, which means they were the closest to safety. And they didn't quite make it, but like I said earlier, they have lost a couple of key players. For those of you that know enough about Leicester, James Maddison and Harvey Barnes were two players that they relied on a lot last season to lead their attack. Both are gone now to Premier League sides, which again we'll talk about more when we build up to the start of the new Premier League season. But Leicester should still have enough about them to make a very, very strong push for the promotion spots, but they are definitely weaker than they were at the back end of last season. Coventry, as was said before, made a very, very strong push and gave an excellent account of themselves all the way in the promotion push last season, but fell on penalties at the final hurdle. Basically, they went as far as they could possibly go without quite making it up to the Premier League. They will be stinging from that, I'm sure, and they will want to set things right this season. So this is not going to be an easy fixture for either team. Leicester will be itching to get back up to the top flight, and Coventry will be wanting to make sure that they get it right this time around. So make sure you try to tune into this match if you can. And try to tune into anything you can in this new weekend of the 23-24 season. I think we're going to wrap that up there for today. I know that there were a lot of team names, a lot of difficult pronunciations, and a lot of new concepts if you're a new fan to the game or a new fan trying to get into how English football is structured. But we will cover everything, and obviously we are more than happy to take requests for specific videos or teams to cover. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please drop a like if you did. Subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about it. Let's get people on this side of the ocean into the game a little bit more. And we'll see you again soon. Remember, it's not soccer. It's called football.